I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for May the 2nd, 2025. Before we get started on our material for today, we do have some significant thunderstorms here in North Texas. We are in the middle of tornado season. We have not had power or internet go out in our neighborhood, but we do know people who have had power and internet go out. So if we have a disruption during our time today, I do apologize in advance. Okay, we do have an announcement before we get started. If you'll go to Messianicapologetics.net, click on the Updates tab. And here you will see Shabbat morning service, May the 3rd, from my local congregation, Etz Chaim. And look at this, Drosh by John McKee, appreciating the calm before the storm, waiting for the end times and fulfilling kingdom purposes. I am delivering the Shabbat message tomorrow. You can watch the service. You can go right here and find it at 10:30 Central Standard Time. And of course, it will be archived when completed. So that's something I am excited about for tomorrow. Okay, our theology roundup. This is, of course, something very important as we review an issue which I don't think gets enough attention within today's Messianic community. First, I would like to reference you to our ministry commentary, Romans for the Practical Messianic. Let me take the banner down for a moment so you can see it. Romans for the Practical Messianic. Of course, Romans is the most important letter ever written in human history. Anyone who has studied the New Testament can tell you that, not just affecting different theological systems, but even different civil systems, how we do government, how we look at various aspects of the world. So if you don't have a copy of Romans for the Practical Messianic, I do recommend you get it, outreachisraelbookstore.com. I will note for you that all of our Practical Messianic commentaries are going through a cycle of being updated and reviewed. So when you see commentaries which have a blue cover, not a reddish cover, that indicates that they have been updated. And the way things are going, Romans will be the last of the commentaries updated. So it's going to be at least a year and a half, if not a little longer. And the updates mostly have to do with where do these issues presently stand within the scope of today's Messianic community and some of the theological developments. You know, the Romans commentary was written over 10 years ago in 2014. So not that I have changed any position significantly, but you always have to account for new things which have occurred, and some of them involve the faith community you serve, others involve the wider religious environment. Okay, so with that in mind, today we're going to be reviewing the I, that is the pronoun I, center of Romans 7:13 through 25. So if you have your Bibles, I do recommend you get them out. Romans 7:13 through 25. You can see I've got my Bible software Logos open here, and I'm going to read these from the Tree of Life version. Therefore, did that which is good become death to me? May it never be. Rather, it was sin working death in me, through that which is good, so that sin might be shown to be sin, and that through the commandment sin might become utterly sinful. For we know that the Torah is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold to sin. For I do not understand what I am doing. For what I do not want, this I practice. But what I hate, this I do. But if I do what I do not want to do, then I agree with the Torah that it is good. So now it is no longer I doing it, but sin dwelling in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For to will is present in me, but to do the good is not. For the good that I want, I do not do, but the evil that I do not want, this I practice. But if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I doing it, but sin that dwells in me. So I find the principle that evil is present in me, the one who wants to do good. For I delight in the Torah of God with respect to the inner man, but I see a different law in my body parts, battling against the law of my mind and bringing me into bondage under the law of sin, which is in my body parts. Miserable man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God, it is through Messiah Yeshua, our Lord. So then, with my mind, I myself serve the Torah of God, but with my flesh, I serve the law of sin. Romans 7:13 through 25, a Tree of Life version. And, this is a passage which I know all of us in today's, Messianic community, we have had our struggles with, we've had our issues with. Some of us don't always know what to do about it, possibly because of how different Christian examiners or Christian interpreters have approached it. But this is actually a very important passage to consider, especially when we review some of the significant religious dramas which have occurred over the past year and a half. And the Messianic community has intersected with these religious dramas in various ways. Now, in Romans 7:13 through 25, the discussion here involves how, of course, the Torah, God's instruction, God's law, reveals the sin in a person's life. The common human inability to obey God's commandments, of course, reveals that human beings have to deal with the presence of sin. There is an acknowledgement here in this text that the Torah's instruction is good, right? Yet there is a struggle to see it implemented. And so there's a battle going on inside. I think all readers of Romans 7:13 through 25 can agree on this. Yet, frequently, Romans 7:13 through 25 has been approached from the perspective of what? The Apostle Paul speaking autobiographically about himself, which would mean that after many, many years of walking with the Messiah, Paul still struggled with sin. That is a conclusion I am sure many of you have taken from Romans 7:13 through 25. Even after many years of walking with Yeshua, Paul still struggled with sin. And in fact, Romans 7:13 through 25 is then frequently, and it is popularly applied as, if Paul still struggled with sin, then I can still struggle with sin too. And Romans 7:13 through 25 is frequently used as an excuse for people to sin. Paul still struggled with sin, so I can struggle with sin too. Now, has that ever bothered you at one point or another in your walk of faith? Not necessarily that we have to deal with a fallen world. We have to deal with the forces of sin, the forces of death. We have to interact with people who are spiritually unregenerated. But have you ever seen a man or a woman who has been a believer for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and they've got some issue that they are dealing with, and they won't confront it? And sometimes Romans 7:13-25, well, Paul still struggled with sin. I can too. And they use it as an excuse to not see some of their limitations overcome. They're using it as a crutch to not, okay, I've got to get on my knees, on my face before God Almighty, and we've got to resolve this. No, Paul still struggled, so I can struggle too. I can, whatever the issue is. Now, ever since I first took exegesis of Romans in the spring of 2007 at Asbury Theological Seminary, I have seen this common approach to Romans 7:13-25 significantly challenged. And sometimes you don't have to go that far to see some alternatives to the popular view. Paul struggled with sin. I can struggle with sin too. You don't have to go that far. Just crack open a few Romans commentaries, which have been written over the past few decades. By now, it should be in a number of good study Bibles. And some of the significant alternatives support the view that, well, how do we know that the Apostle Paul was actually speaking autobiographically about himself? How do we know that the I, sinner, that is the pronoun I, that the I, sinner of Romans 7:13-25 was actually the Apostle Paul? Is it possible that Paul was employing an ancient form of rhetoric in his discussion here? Impersonation, also known as prosopopopeia. And of course, what is impersonation or prosopopopeia? I do this. I'm not supposed to be doing that. I have a problem. I need help. So if Paul employed prosopopopeia or impersonation in Romans 7:13-25, then he was not, in fact, speaking about himself autobiographically. And this has some significant implications for not only one's interpretation of the passage, but most especially application and course of individual faith. Many Romans examiners do not believe that the Apostle Paul was speaking autobiographically in Romans 7:13-25. Instead, they propose various alternatives. And the main ones would be that the hypothetical I, sinner, and again, when we talk about the I, sinner, we're talking about the pronoun I, that the I, sinner, was a person struggling with sin, okay? And this was a person who was either on the immediate path to coming to salvation, or this I, sinner, was someone who had just come to salvation and was struggling with the initial stages of sanctification. Okay, so the main alternatives to Paul not speaking autobiographically in Romans 7:13-25, you're dealing with someone who knows what the righteous principles of God's Torah or law are. It convicts him or her of sin. Something has to be done about this. And what do we do? And of course, the answer is salvation in Yeshua. Either it's describing a person who is on the way to coming to the end of his or herself and recognizing the salvation of Yeshua, or has just come to faith and is now struggling with, okay, how do I see the sin purged from my life? How do I see the effects of sin purged from my life? Because I'm struggling with what it means to now be spiritually regenerated, the initial stages of sanctification, becoming more holy. And if the hypothetical I sinner of Romans 7:13-25 is instead someone who is on the way to coming to faith, coming to salvation, being born again, or has just been born again and is now struggling through the initial growth of becoming more holy, becoming more like the Lord, then Romans 7:13-25 cannot be used by someone who has been a believer for decades and comes to the conclusion that, well, Paul struggled with sin, I can struggle with sin too. Paul himself, not speaking autobiographically in this passage, would have been someone who had progressed way beyond the initial stages of faith and some of the initial struggles of faith. And we have textual justification when you look at Romans chapter 7 to conclude that Paul was not speaking autobiographically, because the sin highlighted in this passage is what? It was covetousness. The sin which Paul continued to carry around some guilt for was what? It was having participated in the persecution and murder of the Messianic Jewish believers prior to coming to faith, prior to his Damascus Road experience. Now, this view of Romans 7:13-25, that it is not speaking of the Apostle Paul, Paul had well advanced beyond the stages of initial sanctification in his own walk, that it's speaking of a hypothetical sinner on the way to saving faith, or has just experienced saving faith and is now struggling with the initial growth of what it meant to be in Yeshua. This view is probably one you will never hear within today's Messianic faith community. And this is 18 years talking here. And you will certainly never hear it in Hebrew Roots or One Law, One Torah. But you will hear about it among those from the holiness tradition. You will hear about it from those who stress the perfection of a man or woman in Yeshua. And right now, of course, what are we having to sort through? We're having to sort through, as a body of Messiah, the effects of some significant leaders over the past year and a half or so who fell into some rather bad sins, and how many of them, in the decisions they made, go back to the interpretation of, well, Paul struggled with sin, I can struggle with sin too. If Paul was not speaking of himself in Romans 7:13-25, and instead a hypothetical sinner, the implications for one's walk of faith and one's maturation process are significant. And I would suspect I'm probably one of the only teachers out there you will ever hear this approach from. I wouldn't be surprised at all. All right, so I realize that is a challenging teaching for some of you. I do recommend that if you have not already, get a copy of our ministry commentary, Romans for the Practical Messianic. This goes into some more detail, and it, of course, documents where some of these discussions originate. But as I said, if you will simply access a number of Romans commentaries composed over the past several decades, you will definitely find this as something to be sorted through. All right, so that finishes our theology roundup for today. What kind of news do we have right now? Because right now, the end of the week, of course, some of the big stories are the papal conclave in Rome, next week selecting a new pope, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, and perhaps a few other things we have to note. All of these stories are going to be listed and available for you to look through when this episode is archived on MessianicApologetics.net. Okay. All right, here's our first story that came across my feed from the Christian Post. Belief in the afterlife is on the rise, even among religious nuns. That is N-O-N-E-S, nuns, not Roman Catholic nuns. Belief in the afterlife is rising among Americans, notably even among those who identify as religious nuns or individuals with no formal religious affiliation. An analysis of recent data indicates a marked increase in belief in an afterlife among non-religious Americans, climbing from roughly 50% in the 1970s to around 60% today. So, okay, there are a lot of people out there who believe that physical death is not the end. They believe that when you die, something is going to happen afterwards. Whether that is, well, I've been a good person, my good deeds outweigh my bad deeds, so that obviously means I get to go to heaven, or where all the good people go. Other people, their version of an afterlife is probably something akin to, well, floating away and joining the universal consciousness. So don't think that belief in an afterlife is something along the lines of what has customarily been witnessed in the Judeo-Christian tradition. But what this indicates more than anything else is these people deep down, because they affirm an afterlife, they know that there's some kind of supernatural, extra-dimensional component to the human being, and that the human being is unique among all the other species out there, that the human being has some kind of an extra-dimensional component to it. The human being is greater than the sum of his or her parts. And that is something, those are deep philosophical questions which you see asked and evaluated throughout both Judaism as well as Christianity. And I think a lot of people in the Messianic Jewish movement can handle some of these discussions pretty well. But in some of the other religious sectors out there, in particular Hebrew roots, and even now, one law, one Torah, the belief that a human being has an extra-dimensional component, a consciousness which can exist elsewhere, that is something which is increasingly denied. But this is just a prompt for us to recognize that people out there in the world of ideas ask questions about life after death, and they're not isolated to those who simply look to the Holy Scriptures. And of course, our ministry has a lengthy book, Messianics and the Afterlife, which goes into topics of heaven and hell and human composition, and where a lot of people in the Messianic sphere of influence tend to be found regarding this. Okay, our next story. This was posted yesterday on Twitter or X. It's a screenshot from Google. Google is here honoring or remembering Israel Independence Day. And the observation is Google is back from woke. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people on the Christian nationalist side who, when an outfit like Google indicates that a Jewish holiday or something like that's being observed, such as Passover, or in this case, Israel Independence Day, but they don't remember Easter or Christmas, well, that just is an indication of the Zionist control of technology and all of this. But you have to keep this in view of what some of these technology platforms allow you to easily find or not find. So I think, generally speaking, this is a good thing. But of course, we know that these trends are in flux, especially as it involves matters of Israel and the Jewish people. Okay, here's something which came across my feed yesterday on social media, on X, Twitter. The yellow structure depicted is the Laniakea supercluster, a vast cosmic region that houses approximately 100,000 galaxies. The red dot in the image represents our home, the Milky Way, which boasts around 300 billion stars, including our own very sun. My goodness, how big is the universe? How massive is the universe? And how many of you have ever, when you see some of these things, what do you think about it? Now, obviously, if you're one of these crazy flat earthers, you think all this has been made up. It's all hokum. It's all a bunch of bunk. But for those of us who are a little more modern and enlightened, the Milky Way galaxy would be like right there. And here we have 100,000 galaxies. And how many more trillion galaxies are in our known universe? The universe is big. And so for spiritual people, for conservative believers to be asking the question, how can we be 100% certain that humankind is not the only sentient civilization which has existed? And how do we know that our eternal God doesn't have other things taking place in this vast universe? Those are not unreasonable questions. And it's not unreasonable to conclude that, well, our holy book says that the Messiah is going to return to the earth. He's going to reign from Jerusalem, and that it's not unreasonable to deduce that when he returns, a lot of things are going to be revealed that we don't know about right now. And it can be prompted by seeing an image like this. The younger somebody is now, the more frequent we're going to have to deal with these kinds of uncomfortable questions. And indeed, I don't have all of the answers, but I'm not willing to see some of these questions just shut down because people are asking them. Let's sort through and let's reason together. God has given us brains, intellect, and most especially his spirit for us to find an answer. And it's okay if we have faith, because faith is the what? The assurance of things not seen, right? Evidence of things not seen. We don't have all the information. Faith means that we trust God to show us the best way of approaching this. So I thought that was a rather interesting graphic. Okay, from the New York Post, and this it's from yesterday, picks up the story on the resignation of Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. President Trump removed Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor because the Floridian would be a better UN ambassador, Vice President J.D. Vance said Thursday, arguing that the former congressman's nomination to represent the U.S. in Turtle Bay could be considered a promotion. Okay, so yes, there was the whole question of Signalgate, but here they're saying that he would be better suited to be the United States ambassador at the United Nations. All right, we'll see how that turns out. Here's a post I encountered on X. Christians and Muslims do not worship the same God, top Catholic cardinal says. I'm just noting this because right now there's going to be some huge debates regarding the next pope, both outside Catholicism, outside the Vatican, but within Catholicism, and definitely within the Vatican. Are we going to see a conservative pope elected who doesn't believe that Christians and Muslims worship the same God, or are we going to see more of an ecumenical pope elected? Roman Catholicism's future, unknown. Thank God I'm not Roman Catholic. But these are still live wire issues, and there should be no doubting the fact that whoever the next pope is going to be is going to affect all of us, certainly sociologically, religiously in some form or fashion, and as well as politically, especially given the significant changes which are taking place right now with the Islamicization of Europe. Okay, this is from open source intel, although I've seen it from a number of other places, mainly posted by President Trump. Alert: all purchases of Iranian oil or petrochemical products must stop now. Any country or person who buys any amount of oil or petrochemicals from Iran will be subject to immediately secondary sanctions. They will not be allowed to do business with the United States of America in any way, shape, or form. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. President Trump definitely wants there to be a resolution to the issue of Iran, Iran's nuclear program, and he's willing to push various sanctions to a maximum point. If you do business with Iran, you're not going to be able to do business with the United States. And indeed, it's one thing to pressure people with military action, which, at the last minute can be pulled back. It's another thing to hit people economically, to hit them in the pocketbook. So the Iranian situation, of course, we continue to monitor and watch that. Okay, two more posts. All right, so this came across my feed yesterday. A Christian, Mike Harris, who is Israel, biblically speaking? And wouldn't you know it, someone on the Hebrew roots, sacred name only side, which you'd get with a name like Yahuwah's war chief, answered, it ain't the folks who are in that tiny patch of land in the so-called Middle East. And of course, somebody down below responded with, definitely not the Revelation 2 Niners, which would be a reference to the synagogue of Satan. So a lot of people in Hebrew roots, a lot of people in the sacred name only movement, they believe that the ethnic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish people, are imposters. They think they are the synagogue of Satan of Revelation 2:9. And yeah, people in Messianic Judaism, when they see some of this, they are rightfully afraid. They are rightfully concerned. And even our own ministry, over the weekend, we featured on our podcast the audio version of the newsletter, Outreach Israel News, dealing with Isaiah 66:8, a nation was born in a day, which I would just say we all take for granted as Messianic people. Yes, I absolutely believe it was about the birth of the state of Israel, but we got some negative feedback saying, nope, it's not about that. And, what do we do about some of these things which are circulating now? The anti-Semitism, the anti-Zionism, and we have to monitor it and we have to discuss it from time to time. And it's not very comfortable because there are a lot of people, especially in light of October the 7th, 2023, the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. It's not just protests from the far left, the pro-Palestine side. It's not just protests from the far right. The church is the new Israel. It's even those who invoke various Hebrew terms, and they could show up at your local congregation or fellowship and, spread poison regarding whether or not today's Jewish people are legitimate. And they would say things like, well, we're grafted in and we're Israel now. So what do you do about promises of a return of ethnic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the Holy Land? Okay, and then finally, and this is from earlier today, the New York Post, the U.S. is stepping back from its involvement in peace talks between Russia and Ukraine to end the war, a State Department official signaled Thursday. State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce told the reporters that the U.S. will not be the mediators going forward, reflecting President Trump's frustration at the lack of progress between Kiev and Moscow and ending the bloodshed. Now, I've got to be honest, when I first saw this, I was very disappointed. We know that the Trump administration has just had their first 100 days. I'm sure some of you are very pleased with what the Trump administration has done. We know a lot of people who are very displeased. And other people think that, well, during the campaign and during all those rallies Trump had, how many of the things did he promise were just empty rhetoric? I'm going to have this thing solved within the first day of office. Well, the Russia-Ukraine conflict still has not been solved. So there are a lot of people who are disappointed that Trump has not gone as fast as he promised. Fortunately, Donald Trump is not my savior. But yeah, I'm disappointed in this. And, I understand that some people conclude that, well, Trump is, he's playing 5D chess. He's thinking 10 moves down. And this is just part of the art of the deal or negotiation. And you need to back off and give him the benefit of the doubt. Okay. But we still have to live in the day-to-day world. And we still have to have a plan B. What if there can't be a peace between Russia and Ukraine? What if the Middle East situation can't be resolved? But we know that the world is ultimately under the control of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And yes, while we want to see the Russia-Ukraine situation resolved, all we can do is continue to appeal to him for, Lord, we need peace in the world. We don't need the apocalypse. All right, so as we close up this afternoon, I want to remind some of you that tomorrow I will be giving the message at my local congregation, appreciating the calm before the storm, waiting for the end times and fulfilling kingdom purposes. You can just access this, go to the updates tab here at messianicapologetics.net. It is at 10:30 Central Standard Time. And with that in mind, I pray that you all have a blessed and restful weekend. The Lord is with us in spite of the world getting more and more unstable, out of control. He has a plan for all of us, and especially for the people of today's Messianic movement. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and donations for all of our ministry efforts. You can give online at outreachisrael.net/support. We'll see you again Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.